Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this virtual conversation with Professor Sir Partha Dasgupta to discuss the Dasgupta Review on the Economics of Biodiversity. The ideas in this review will play a key role in the future of nature conservation, which is why we're so excited that at today's event, we are being joined by the key author of the review, Professor Dasgupta himself. He will be speaking with Dr. Bruno Oberle, the IUCN Director General, and with yourselves, so many of our esteemed members and colleagues from all over the world. Today, we want to hear your questions, and so to submit them, please use the chat function on YouTube. We will be selecting a few to be asked later on in the session. And when you type in your questions, please also include your name, your IUCN office, or your IUCN member organization if you're writing as a member, and lastly, where in the world you're writing from. We want to ensure that we ask questions from all corners of the globe. So we will kick off by having a short conversation between Dr. Oberle and Professor Dasgupta till around half the hour. And then we will turn to questions from you, our audience, until the very end. Just to let you know, this session will be recorded and will be made available for you to relive the discussion whenever you want. All right, with this then, without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Oberle to deliver his opening words. Dr. Oberle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jose, and good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. We feel, we know, and we understand that the crisis around the global environmental commons is getting worse every year. Even in this very challenging time when the pandemic is occupying a big part of our mind, we realize that this crisis is continuing. And it is recognized by the political community, it is recognized by the financial community, it is recognized by business and by societies more and more. And we are asking now why? Where are the root causes of this crisis? And we have gathered experiences in the climate discussion. I remember some 10 years ago when in the climate discussion, the issue about the economics and climate relation came onto the table. At that time, through a document written by the lead author, Sir Nicholas Stern. I remember I was part of the negotiations at that time, and this was a complete game changer. Suddenly, we were able to speak with other actors, with other stakeholders. We were able to speak with Ministry for Economy, Ministry for Finance. We were able to speak with node banks around the world. And these changed the language in which the community was talking to the other and make the climate topic more understandable, or also for actors in the economic world. This changed the way in which the climate challenge is uptaken and made start the movement that is ongoing till today, tackling and working against the climate change with technological means, reflecting on the right investments at the right place in the world. We have exactly the same situation in the biodiversity sector. We have big difficulties in transport our message to other actors than our close community. And this is the reason because this review, the review on the economic aspects of biodiversity that was led by Professor Dasgupta, has the potential to be the same game changer. the report on climate and economics was 10 years ago. I hope really that we will be able in a couple of years from now to have the same informed discussion with the finance sector about the needed regulation and around investment, that we will have the same engagement of private companies acting and displaying their engagement in the core of their activity and not simply for image. We will have investment going at solving the problem. This is for me, at the starting point of a new chapter in the biodiversity politics. And this is the reason because I'm very happy to be here together with Professor Dasgupta, with Partha Dasgupta, to discuss these topics. And I will start asking Partha a first very general question that can shape the landscape of this conversation. What are the main takeover from your review, Partha?
I should begin by noting that I was asked by the UK Treasury to produce a review of the economics of biodiversity, which is both independent of government and a global review. It's important to recognize that fact. And it was very important that it should be seen as a global review because the problem is global in nature. And although obviously the actions are taking place at the local level, as always the case, the main message, the first central message, is that we must take nature seriously as an asset. Various bits and pieces of nature, and we are looking at now billions of pieces of nature, billions and billions of pieces of nature, starting from microorganisms to gigantic biomes. They play a vital, absolutely essential role in our lives, not just our economic lives, but our daily lives, even shorn of economics. But they are central to economics because our economies, because we are embedded in nature. Our economies are embedded in nature. Nothing we do is independent of our relationship with nature, what we take out from it, what we do with it, and what we put back into the biosphere. So the first thing is to recognize that, and that's a big, big change, because as of now, academic models of growth and development and the income expenditure models that treasuries, finance ministries use do not recognize nature as an essential part, the fabric of our economies. So the first message is take nature seriously as an asset. It's essential. If it breaks down, our economies will break down. We won't actually exist if it totally breaks down. The review then proceeds to map out the implications of our regarding nature as an economic asset. And going beyond it, of course, if you feel you want to take a leap and say it's more than just economics, nature has greater worth than simply an economic object, that's fine. The review is not only sensitive to it, it insists on it. But one takes it step by step. To ignoring it completely, as we today do, moving from there to treating it properly requires a whole set of steps, and the review is concerned with doing that.
Thank you. I mean, you say treat it as an asset. One element that we need to treat something as an asset, it is an important element of that knowledge, of that approach, is that we would be able to give them a value, to identify the metrics of these assets. And this is something that maybe in climate was easier to do, CO2, 1.35 degree. In biodiversity is extremely more complex than that. Do you have, did you look in that, and what type of suggestion you have?
Sure. It is, you're quite right. We are looking at orders of magnitude more difficult this area from climate change because there isn't a single metric. And I'll explain why it shouldn't, having observed that, having accepted that, we shouldn't be deterred. In some ways, the economics of biodiversity is more intuitive than the economics of climate change, because we all see biodiversity at every moment of our life. Just look out the window and you're going to see nature. So there is an immediacy about what happens if that vanished, the question, than asking what will happen if the temperature rises another 3 degrees on average, the mean global temperature, because we don't have any experience with it. We do have some experience with this. So let's get that right. Second point is that to an academic economist and to a government decision maker, it may seem such a big thing to say nature is an asset, but it's not a big thing for the farmer or the fisherman or the woodcutter, the person who lives, or the children and the family which goes out of their home to collect firewood, fetch water in Africa villages and South Asian villages and so forth. They're living in nature. Those are assets. They're husbanding it. Extremely important. So what we're saying here is nothing new. It will not come as a surprise. It'll seem an obvious thing to the farmer and the fisherman or the miner or whatever. It comes as a surprise to us because we've fallen into bad habit in economics and in policymaking. We do not include natural capital, the bits and pieces of nature that enters into production. And I'll come to that in a second. So you had mentioned rightly that you need a valuation problem. Let me put it the other way. We value goods in the market on the basis of their prices. Now, that doesn't mean that's their value. But because we can observe it and we have to pay for it, we infer that it's reflecting the value of that object. Here, it's required, absolutely essential, that we ask the question in a different way, not about what price we pay for it. That would be just the wrong thing, but what is the value to the production unit or the consumption unit or to the household unit that is making use of it, which is exactly what a farmer would do. The farmer would ask, what is the value to me of an extra gallon of water at a particular time of the year for a particular patch of the land that he's cultivating, because he'll be asking, what would happen if I didn't have that gallon of water? How will it affect output on that little patch? That's kind of precisely the kind of a calculation he does, and that's what we should be doing. Now, of course, easier is to ask than to answer, because some of the stuff is going to be very hard. But just as we look at the productivity of schooling, of health, of building a road or extending a port, for that you require an understanding of what it will contribute, that expansion will contribute to our well-being. We're doing that all the time. And we can ask exactly the same question with regard to ecosystems. Now, there were several questions, Bruno, in the question that you posed. So I'm going to try and work around it, because you've asked absolutely the key question. As you noted, there is no single metric. The review I've prepared does not talk about a social price of biomass, which you might think would be the counterpart of the economics of climate change, where you talk about the social cost of carbon. And biomass is, of course, a measure of carbon. So why haven't I got biomass as my unit and then work around trying to estimate the accounting price or the social price of carbon? The reason is, and we take a completely different view, the review. In the review, our unit of analysis, my unit of analysis is an ecosystem, and the services, the goods and services ecosystems produce. And of course, the notion of an ecosystem is extremely large, starting from microorganisms, communities of microorganisms. For example, a hedgehog's gut is an ecosystem. And so is the woodland in which the hedgehog happens to reside. That's an ecosystem as well. The open oceans are ecosystems and so forth. But that's okay. So long as you know what they are, what their place is in the economy, you should in principle be able to add it to the economic model. Now, the problem is that the conventional models do not include any form of natural capital, except when you graft it in when you're asked to. So today, if an economist in the Treasury is asked about climate change, he will look up a paper or a report in which the climate has been put in to the economic model, grafted in as an add-on. But the climate will be in the form of emissions leading to concentration leading through climate models to some assessment of climate. And then the feedback onto what it might do to the economy. But the moment you move to some other problem, say on general income taxation, the climate model is taken away from the model so that you've got a flexible core model in which nature doesn't appear. That's really bad practice. And what the review is urging governments to do is to keep nature or natural capital firmly in economic models. So first thing would be, in terms of measurement of value, is to look at the contribution of an ecosystem in the particular problem that you study. Say, for example, if you're studying a expansion of a road system, which is going to destroy or cut through a wetland, you should be asking, what does the wetland do for, say, for example, cleansing water, purifying water, and many other things, of course. Okay, but those are the things you need to know, and you can only know it by consulting ecologists. And they're very prominently missing in economic ministries. That's the problem. Now, that's one class. Then there are other kinds of value, of course. A great deal of work has been done by economists, environmental and resource economists, trying to estimate the value of amenities, which are not contributing to necessarily production, but to our enjoyment. Say, for example, a beach or a coastline or some such thing, national parks. And there are methods of trying to estimate the value to us, but those are amenities. Then at the other extreme, of course, would be ecosystems or maybe patches of forests or bits of the coastline, which are sacred to the community. That's different. That's additional, far more. And the word sacredness means it's non-negotiable. So don't even try and put a price on it. You just keep it aside. You're not to touch it. No trade-offs allowed. I'm putting it in dramatic terms only because people mustn't think that because we're talking economics, we are always talking in terms of prices.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, the center of your message is a ton of CO2 is a pretty uniform things that they have the same origin and the same effect more or less everywhere. Ecosystems are very local, very partially specific, and we have to understand the function of all these ecosystems wherever they are in their own characteristic, and then you use a total value approach, and then you use, I imagine, the replacement approach, how much it would cost to recreate what it was there once it is destroyed.
That's right. But there's one caveat I should mention, because it has I've been asked this several times elsewhere, but you wouldn't be asking that, but it would be something other maybe. When we talk about pricing nature, that's usually seen as a very aggressive notion. You know, you're going to price the whole of nature, creation. That's not what is meant. Nobody's pricing nature in the sense the review in the chapter 2, I think, or no, chapter 1, the first chapter makes it explicit that valuing nature in total is a meaningless word, because if it didn't exist, we would not exist. So there's nobody to exchange money with or prices with. So that's not what is important. What we are studying is changes in the structure of natural capital. Okay. So that's what we're trying to value. Bits and pieces, changes.
Yeah, and we know that these changes are very strong happening in these days, and this leads me to another. I try to link as Director General of a global union. It is the way in which I look at these topics. I try to link it into a political debate, right? And if I see also the value of nature is a very local, specific one, wherever they are. And when it comes to a negotiation in the human community, who have to do what, then there will be places in the world that are extremely biodiversity rich, and other places that are less biodiversity rich. In this sense, we would then put the burden on the one that have this richness in their houses. And I am pretty convinced that this will not work in the global negotiation. We will have to go to the concept in the climate sector was common but differentiated responsibilities and compensation for the different approaches. Do you have thoughts on that? Because this is
yes, yes. Thank you very much. These thoughts are all tentative, because at the end of the day, it will be the nations speaking to one another in summits. And so I can only give the analytical background for the debate, not the debate itself. So this is extremely important. First, very, very small point, which is we don't speak about biomass, social value of biomass, because a unit of biomass in the Amazon is very different from a unit of biomass in the Sahara. So we don't speak about biomass shadow price. We don't talk about biomass offsetting markets and so forth, because they will not work. They're not on the agenda, at least not on my review's agenda. There are a vast spectrum of cases, starting from bits and pieces of nature, which are broadly speaking private, in the sense that if you mess around with it, you'll get hurt, but not many people. Right to the other extreme, where you have biomes which are global public goods. To make it very brief, let's consider two types of global public goods. By public goods, I mean everybody benefits from it. Okay, not necessarily equally, but everybody does. Okay. One is, of course, the open oceans. Another is the atmosphere as a sink for carbon emissions or pollutants. Those are two. And then contrast them with another set of global public goods, which would be the tropical rainforests. That they're the ones, Bruno, you were implicitly alluding to, rich in biodiversity, rich in many, many things. And the peatlands, the soil under our feet, the peat. Those are huge ecosystems, gigantic. We forget them because they're under our feet and silent, but they are too. Okay, now those are two different types. Take the rainforests. They are a global public good, but they are within national jurisdictions. In contrast, the atmosphere and the open oceans are global public goods, but they're not under national jurisdictions. In fact, they're open access. Anybody can use them, and anybody does use them, or everybody uses them. Whoever wants to go sailing or shipping goods across the oceans, they're doing it, but nobody's paying a price. So let's take first the case of the global commons, or the open oceans. One of the recommendations the review makes is that there it is really high time that the nations, like they did immediately after the Second World War, create international institutions, transnational institutions like the World Bank, IMF. These were created after the war to provide global public goods. And those were development, economic development, restructuring, reconstruction on the one hand, and stability, financial stability on the other. These are global public goods. Instability would be a huge harm to everybody. So those two were founded and given powers and backed by support, financial support, to get on with the job of managing those two types of global public goods. The ones I have now is, we feel it's extremely important at this juncture to be bold, treat the thing as though we're either recovering from a war or we would go into, I mean, a metaphorical war. I mean, not a war against nature. All right, that's a reasonable way of looking at it. We are actually engaged in that. We must make peace with nature. And one way of doing that is to have a global institution which will be charged with managing, monitoring and managing. And managing means should have the right to charge, obviously with the agreement with countries, a rent for their use. Very crude calculations say that the rents that we could collect for the traffic that and the fisheries that we enjoy from the open seas would be gigantic. We're looking at a very, very large amount of money. If that could be used to compensate for those global public goods which are within national jurisdictions, which is exactly what, Bruno, you were alluding to, because of course they need to be compensated. They have every right to say, why should we will be paying some cost, but the benefits you're all enjoying, so why should we not? Now, how that will pan out is a different matter. It's not for me to talk about, but we need to think like that. Unfortunately, the climate change discussion hasn't gone in that direction at all. In principle, you could imagine that just like the open seas, because the atmosphere is a global public good into which we are all emitting, maybe there should be something to manage that and have it, just for the sake of argument, a tax on the use of it, just for the sake of argument, okay? And that tax revenue could be then allocated on needs-based development program, God knows what else. But we haven't done that. What we've done is each nation agrees on some limit of concentration and then makes a pledge to attain at least the emissions that are required of it. And the commitments are not essentially enforceable as far as I can make out. But the corresponding thing for the open oceans would be each country would take make a commitment to how much it'll use, how much of traffic it'll do. But you can see how absurd it will become if you do it that way. See, it seems to me a natural thing would be the one we've used in the past to commit ourselves, give our allegiance and trust to an international institution, which we all own, which will manage these public goods.
Yeah, it's very logic. I remember Switzerland put forward a proposal in the climate negotiation to impose a global tax on CO2 of $1 and an additional $2 for country over a certain GDP per capita. So very low prices, and we had two nations agreeing with us among the 200 that were represented in the COP. There are very, very tough topics to discuss at the global level. There is also another aspect of this political debate. If I say we should limit the use of nature, in our case of the use of biodiversity, at one moment, the price of biodiversity would grow, and these would, if the limitation would be a kind of fixed restriction to a certain amount, like in the case of climate, so and so many tons emission allowed. This would be a kind of an additional restriction to our economic activity. That of course the economic system could internalize and deal with, but it would be a restriction similar to the amount of money in a way. Now, in the political debate, I had also this discussion with the representative of the business sector, and the response was absolutely crystal clear. No way, we will not accept restriction to something else that the amount of money that is put into the market. Of course, we would need to create playing level field at the global scale, and so.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
The second difficulty is that we have to
yeah.
right.
There are many things to talk about here. One is, of course, there is beginning to be a general understanding that we need to keep certain amount of land and water and land as protected spheres. Well, that's real restrictions. I mean, if you say 30% of land and seas are to be protected, it means infinite price for getting in there. It's protected, okay? The problem, and that's fine by me, that's not a problem, because one of the things I've shown in the review at great length is the idea that in economics only prices matter, you can't have quantity constraints, is completely wrong. It's wrong, analytically wrong. The economics of incomplete and asymmetric information, which is now about 40 years old, has made it abundantly clear that public finance involves the recognition that of nonlinear prices for reaching efficient allocation of goods and services. So nonlinear prices, of course, extreme forms of nonlinear prices are restrictions, quantity restrictions. So protected sphere, already we are moving away from prices, right, in talking about protected spheres. But it is important, I think, for the private sector, companies to recognize that they are being restricted even now. We restrict the quality of products. We inspect the quality of products. They're not allowed to produce in principle unless they reach certain quality, particularly about when we as citizens insist on our health being protected. We ask for enormous disclosure of what they're selling us. Any food product I buy in the supermarket will have a list as long as your arm telling you what kinds of ingredients there are in terms of calorie intake and so forth and so on. Why? Those are restrictions. They're not prices, they're restrictions. You have to disclose. You can't buy yourself away from disclosing. Why is this disclosure? The disclosure is insisted upon because the prices do not reveal the content, the value of the product. The buyer does not know what the product is, so he needs more information, which is why a disclosure is required. Likewise, if we citizens insist that, look, the market system and institutions that we have are not capable of handling the enormous amount of externalities we have created by the fact that we have 7.8 billion people enjoying something like $18,000 a year as per capita income, we are big. We have big onslaught. And so the extent to which externalities are pervasive is huge now. It wasn't like that 70 years ago, certainly not 200 years ago. So we are now in a different league. Now, in a situation like that, the price system simply cannot reflect the social values of what you're doing. So therefore, we need alternatives to it. If you can add to it, that's fine. But if you can't, which we can't, then disclosures is a substitute for incomplete information. So we could, if we take nature seriously in the sense that we regard our descendants' rights over what they inherit from us as really serious, and they're our children, our grandchildren, so we should be taking them seriously, then we could insist that firms disclose their entire production chain, supply chain. What are let's say you're buying coffee in the supermarket, you will want to know something about where that coffee comes from, like the original plantation from which the coffee beans are grown. Well, what's the condition of the workers there? What's the condition of the ecosystem there? Have there been all sorts of financial manipulations at that stage where the government has colluded with the landowners? God knows what else. There's a lot of mess around here. This is a very murky world, which, Bruno, you're even more aware of it than I am, probably. Now, we want to know that. If the citizens insist on that information, then I'm afraid the firms will have to cave in, because if they don't, we won't buy from them. Wow. So citizens have not only the market power, but the voice to be able to get the economy moving in the direction as is needed. So ultimately, it's our responsibility as citizens, it seems to me, and that's what the review urges us to do.
Thank you so much, Professor Dasgupta, Dr. Obele. If I may jump in here, there's always so much to say, but unfortunately, we only have so little time. We have now reached the part of the event where we open up to questions from the audience, and we have questions coming in. Now, to start the ball rolling, I would like to begin with the question from Christopher Dunn, who is from the IUCN member, the Cornell Botanic Gardens, and from the US National Committee, writing to us from the USA. Now, he wants to know, how can we more effectively incorporate the voices and the needs of local and indigenous communities in this conversation? Professor, over to you.
Well, the first step would be to have serious democracy. That's for sure. They have a right just as you and I do. And that right has been suppressed because you and I don't know them and we don't care. And that's why they've gone under. This happened in many of the countries that I'm familiar with. So the first thing is the state has an obligation to disclose, to allow entry of the media, of journals, of newspapers, of press, to be able to reflect on the conditions of people who are voiceless because they were poor or they're not connected for a variety of reasons. That's fine. That's not a problem for me, that people are not hooked into the metropolitan world that you and I happen to reside in. I would hope they would have the opportunity. That's a different matter. But their voice must be heard. Their needs must be met. So yes, it's democracy and free press, which is of great importance.
Thank you so much for that. That was very powerful. So now let's move on to another question, approaching from another completely different subject. This is from Juliet Parrish, who's from ODI, the Overseas Development Institute, and also from the IUCN member, Namibia Nature Foundation, writing to us from Namibia. She wants to know, quantification exercises have difficulties integrating the complexity of natural systems. How can economics overcome this barrier?
Can I have the first part of the question?
Of course. Quantification exercises.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. It's the quantifying experience is really difficult, largely because there isn't a easy bit coming through the market system, the price system. It's again, we're back to the fact that we don't have a price system, and for a variety of reasons that we understand, the review talks about mobility of nature, its silence, and its invisibility as being three core features of nature, which make it very, very difficult for markets to flourish and do what it's expected of them to do. But quantification is possible. It may not be possible to me sitting in my home and being an academic, but it is possible for the farmer, the forester. These are the actors I'm talking about, and those actors have a sense of what is needed. Of course, they may not have the scientific knowledge. That's where the ecologist is required, the agronomist is required, a fusion of the knowledge base of people on the ground and experts who know something about the chemistry, the physics, the biology of the system. By the way, the local farmer, even in the middle of India or in Africa, knows quite a bit of biology, but it will be expressed in a different way, obviously, because they don't have the language that is on offer in technical subjects. But it is extremely important, and the review makes it abundantly clear that we do need very much the presence of the local actor, because it is the local actor who is affecting or making use of the local ecosystem. And it's that which we want to help the state or whoever, or the NGO wants to help improve that action. So I wouldn't be worried about so much about measurement, because it's a matter of expressing what it is you want to measure. It could be flow of water. It could be the quality of the soil. These are measurable objects, and any soil expert or agronomist will say these are the key variables and we need to measure them. And of course, the farmer might say there is some other variable you haven't taken into account because there are some persistent local features that a global expert will be missing. But that's okay. dialogue, consistent dialogue, continual dialogue is what's required. The idea of sending experts in and then reporting back to central office is not quite the model that we have in the review. The review has a model in which the expert is attending to the needs of the local community. And then continual feedback between the models that are created in New Delhi or London are embellished regularly on the basis of information coming from the local fabric, because there are a chain of communication open throughout. So yes, I'm not worried. That doesn't faze me one bit. That's doable. All of this really is pointing to some form of democratic participation.
Is exactly what I wanted to state, because you make a relation between let's say the data and the needed format. No, so nature requires a basis democratic approach structurally, because it is so diverse, and this is politically a very strong message at the end of the day. If this is the only way to capture the value, then we need this basis participation to
That's exactly right. That's exactly how I see the matter.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Dasgupta. Thank you so much, Dr. Obele. So the next question here is being asked by Andrew Howard from the IUCN member Population Matters in the United Kingdom. He's writing from the United Kingdom. So the question is, your review directly addresses the issue of global population growth. When do you think that governments and policymakers will do the same in a meaningful way?
I can't predict that at all. I am at a loss to understand something which, to a scientist like myself, is very hard to understand, explain. If you look at the review, you will find I tried to simplify as far as possible to collapse the picture of our engagement with nature as a whole, the global engagement with nature, in terms of essentially 5 variables. We call it the impact inequality, which is the global demand for goods and services that Mother Nature offers, and the Mother Nature's ability to supply that, meet that demand, those demands at a sustainable way, and reduce it to 5 variables. Now, of course, it's an utter simplification, but that's not the point. The point is you have an identifiable number of type of variables, one of which is population. Another is the standard of living. Another is the efficiency, technology, and institutions which convert goods and services, or enable you to convert goods and services that Mother Nature produces into final products. That's the left-hand side, the demand. Okay. If you have 3 out there, the 3 parameters there, why am I supposed not to, why am I expected to ignore one of them and say that's not up for discussion? So I really have sympathy for the question, for the simple reason, for 30 years, I've not got a clear answer as to why we shouldn't be discussing population. Now, I've written enormous amounts on this, largely because the viewpoint I'm expressing is not monocausal. It is as wrong to say that global population size of 7.8 billion today is responsible for our total demand and what we are doing to nature. It's as wrong to say that as it is to say that it's all due to our global problems are due to the amount of food that the West consumes. These are all interrelated variables. And that's the review spends several chapters showing how perturbing one affects the others and so forth. There's no question that we have a problem in terms of there are externalities associated with reproduction, and those externalities, you could simply say they don't matter. You can say that, but that will be an ex cathedra statement. Population matters, just as our food intake, our habits matter. All these things are related. The review is 600 pages for that reason. It's not an easy read, only because the subject is so hard. So I don't know the answer to the question, because I've been working on it for 40 years and trying to tease out all the reasons, what the motivations we have. It's one of the deepest things in our human desires, family size, family, children, grandchildren, absolutely. And it's extremely important we protect that part of our life well. We haven't been doing it because the sophisticate, the upper classes, do not wish to discuss it. I just don't. I know it from experience. This is a admission of frustration, if you like, of 30 years of frustration. Even my students say, well, what's the policy? I mean, okay, well, how would you get a policy unless you actually discuss it to see? And we're not talking about command and control, not at all. We're simply saying, are there ways in which we can empower women to make decisions which are in their interest? And there is so much of poverty in the world, so much of a lack of access to the instruments of good life, of a good life. It seems to me an extremely important part of aid today should be towards family planning and reproductive health investment, because you've got 230 million women of reproductive age in poor countries who have no access, who would have unmet need for family planning, they're expressing it. So I throw up my hands. I've done my best. I've written down on the subject. There's a whole chapter on the subject, giving you all sorts of reasons as to why we can have a civilized conversation over it. But there you are. I can't say any more on that.
Thank you so much, Professor. That's a lot to chew on for us, indeed. So let me move on then to the next question. Now, this is being written by Sonia Pena, who works in the IUCN Global Policy Unit here in Switzerland. And also we have a question from Holly Dublin, who is the Senior Advisor from our Eastern and Southern African Regional Office. The both of them have asked something similar. So please allow me to combine the two of you. So, investing in nature and in nature-based solutions at scale pays off. This information has been around for a very long time. How can we set the incentives right to address the biodiversity and climate crisis and the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I'll come to the second part later. I have less expertise on COVID-19, except for placing the realm of pandemics in the general problem of biodiversity protection. But there is, let me start with the basic problem that one has, or people in IUCN would have experienced, I have no doubt, because without being in IUCN, I've found that difficulty when discussing these matters of conservation and restoration investment with friends of mine, contemporaries of mine who are big people now in governments and in international organizations and so forth, which is show me the money. Where's the rate of return? They don't have yield. Take the extreme case, very slow growing forest. Why should we invest in that? The oak tree takes 100 years to grow, and that's the payoff. Well, there are so many other things to do. That's the first thing that an environmentalist comes across. So here is how I would advise all of us to address this question to a public decision maker, a government decision maker. This won't work for the private sector, of course not, because they're looking at their shareholders and therefore their private markets. But I'm talking about government, civil servants. It is common practice in evaluating projects, appraising projects, investment projects, to look to in the feasibility report, write down the estimates of costs and benefits over the time. Let's say a 30-year project or 40-year project, the benefit and cost stream. And what you do is try and give social prices to the goods and services that are in the project. Each year, look at the net benefits. Initially, of course, it'll be costs only because it's an investment stage, later the benefits and so forth. And then discount it at some rate or the other to come up with the net present value. That's the rule. That's the technique that we use. And it's a correct technique, by the way. But the problem is, of course, usually natural capital doesn't come into these calculations. That's why it's missed. But now assume that we we're all in agreement. We're going to introduce natural capital in the project. That is to say, if we're using natural capital, we're doing something bad to a wetland, that will be treated as a cost and so forth. Let's not worry about that. Okay, but the common practice is that the net benefits, the flow of benefits and costs, are typically, for simplicity, assumed to be the same each year. So when the profits start coming, net benefits start coming in year 4 or year 5, from then on for the next 50 years, it'll be approximately constant. And then you discount back. Now, here's the problem. If you have you're in a world in which human capital and produced capital are rising at a fast rate, which has been the case the last 40, 50, 60 years, all right? And natural capital as a group has been going down at a fast rate. That's why we are here discussing the matter, because there's a big gap between demand and supply. So each year, as you can see, the gap is growing or has been growing. Now, in a world like that, wouldn't you expect the price of one relative to the other change? Because you're accumulating one and decumulating the other. And you would expect the factor which is being decumulated, the price of that factor to be rising relative to the one which is being accumulated. That's straightforward economics, classical economics. There's nothing phony about, nothing mysterious in what I'm saying. Therefore, in that project, the gross benefit, let's say it's a restoration project, and the restoration project is yielding a benefit in terms of the stuff which is growing. Investment here, it means weight. Weighting is the investment because it's growing. You're leaving it alone. Let's say it's a conservation project, you're leaving it alone. If it's a restoration project, you're doing something to help it grow. Okay, so that's fine. It's growing. Now its value is growing. When I say it is growing, the value of the benefit is growing because meanwhile, your natural capital, global natural capital is going down. So the discount rate you'll be using on the benefit, the gross benefit of the restoration project may even be negative. If the price is growing faster than the rate at which you're discounting, then of course the benefit stream is actually growing. The discount rate you're using to value that benefit stream is negative, which means it amplifies the benefit in the distant future. The farther you peer, the bigger the amplification. It's just the reverse of shrinking it through discounting. Okay, so that's really a key message, which I urge all of us to take away, because do not be fooled by the argument that where is the return? And you say, well, you should be using accounting price, not market price. Okay, says says the decision maker, the public decision maker. But remember, we are using 3% or 4% to discount future benefits. And this wretched thing is going to give me benefits a long time from now. And I can show you that at 3%, it'll be negligible value. That's when you kick in the argument I've just now given. It will buy you a lot of mileage because it happens to be correct.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now, we're getting lots of questions coming in, but I think we only have time for one more. So I think the last question that I will ask you from our audience is from Saurav Mahaldra, who is writing from the IUCN member, the Balipara Foundation in India. So he asked, would it be easier to begin with valuing the tangible goods based on current local market prices that indigenous forests provide? For example, this could be wild food or building material.
Yes, of course. That's exactly the kind of issues that I was discussing with Bruno earlier. That is to look at the productivity. That's right. That's the first cut, would be to look at the productivity, if you like. It's in effect, if you're suggesting that would be the way to do it. You want to see what does it do to the stuff that we want. Now, some years ago, some decades ago, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment very nicely broke down, partitioned nature's goods and services into provisioning services and maintenance and regulating services. And then there were cultural services as well. But I want to concentrate on the maintenance and regulating ones, like the climate regulation, nitrogen fixation, all the background stuff that's going on in nature, which is allowing us to grow food, grow trees, to have timber, clean water, and so forth and so on. Okay. Now, what the review does is to show that there is a real serious conflict, tension between these two types of services. Our demand for provisioning services grown, and that's the demand I was talking about, and that is undercutting the maintenance and provisioning, the maintenance and regulating services. The review goes into that in great detail. And the key thing here is, and implicit in this question is, you want to look at the productivity of the maintenance and regulating services in terms of provisioning services. You were talking about food or water. That's exactly right. So, for example, a very simple case would be, what is the productivity of a wetland, which is cleaning water, which is filtering water, which then downstream farmers are using for agriculture or drinking or whatever the case might be. Well, one way of doing that would be to say, what would it cost to produce a purification plant to replace the wetland in case the wetland is destroyed? That would be then you would say, well, that's the opportunity cost. No, this is all very crude, goes without saying. But the nature of the beast is crudity, no question about it. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Particularly given that our subject, the discipline that IUCN is so beautifully worked on for years and years and years, is neglected. So it doesn't have the backing of 50, 60 years of high-powered research by statisticians, econometricians, and economists in estimating shadow prices for goods and services, the conventional goods and services. So there's no need to be apologetic that anything we say, any estimate, will be extremely crude. That's fine. That's the nature of the thing. We're new to it. But crude though they are, they're better than saying it's valueless. That's a big jump. So that's exactly what we should do. Try and estimate the productivities of it. And here's the thing, and what the review does is to look at the use value, i.e. the productivity, the implicit in the question, and then says that the reason we are not discussing the non-use values so much, the fact that it has maybe sacred, or it may have inherent value, intrinsic value, existence value, is that if you can show that limiting yourself to use value will buy us a lot in terms of protecting nature, then adding those additional values will mean protected even more. I would be in trouble if I only used use value and could only show that, well, maybe not business as usual, but it doesn't really matter very much if nature continues to plummet. Then you would be up at arms and saying, well, look, Dasgupta, there's so many other values to it. But as a minimal view of nature, as is implicit in the question that's just been asked, a minimalist view is a very good one to start with, because it'll buy us a lot.
Thank you so much for that, Professor. Now, time is running away with us, and we are almost at the end of the hour.
Can I interrupt and just simply say it's been a great privilege to be with you. I think you're a phenomenal institution. I was saying to Dr. Oberle that 40 years ago, a little over 40 years ago, the first book, two books I read, one was Ehrlich Holden's Ecoscience, which opened up a whole world to me. But it was an academic book. And there was a book, and I've forgotten, I have it in my library, but I'm not near my library, I'm at home, produced by the IUCN, which gave me an enormous number of examples which I used, which I didn't have because I'm an academic, ground level examples, which I used in a book called The Control of Resources, which I published in 1982. So I'm a fan, and so it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much. Wow. Well, on that note, I would like to invite Dr. Oberle to deliver a few closing words. Dr. Oberle, please.
I have also a book that shaped that drifted me to what I am working now, and it is The Limit to Growth. That is a strong economic background. So it was always linked in my mind how can we best manage the limited platform where we are living on, with the potential infinite wishes and needs that we have. And here we are in this with the topic of managing biodiversity the best we can to support us in our strive for a better life. Well, here this is a central discussion, and I take a couple of messages. The first one, it is nature is structurally in favor of participation. It is structurally, let's say, favoritizing democratic approach. The second one, it is even if the participation approach is so strong, we need decision from the communities. And you made the example of the biggest potential community, the worldwide state assembly, for example, to create a sound management of the oceans. So it is about, we need the community regulations. We need, because this complexity will force us to find a way to produce the signals, to use the best way nature beyond the price signals. And this is what in your review you address also, I imagine, among others, with the institutional failure that you are also describing there. We need, it is a, biodiversity is a democratic thing, that it is something that we all need in our life. And we all know, and this is the reason, because the information of all of us are needed to create this value. At the other side, to integrate all this knowledge, we need strong institutions at the local, at the regional, at the global level, because through these we can overcome the limitations that the normal pricing theory and the normal way to flag the right value of things through the markets. And these are two messages that are very good uptaken for IUCN. We are by structure a membership organization, a participation-oriented organization, and we are working for let's say, global agreements in the community. My uptake is IUCN should become even stronger, a stronger actor in the global political discourse around biodiversity. Thank you very much, Partha, Professor Dasgupta. It was a great pleasure. We will count on you in future to support us with your wisdom, with knowledge, and your suggestion. And I thank all the colleagues around the world that have participated in these meetings. Thank you very much for taking the time to discuss this very important topic. Bye-bye, all of you.
Thank you everyone for your energy today and for this amazing discussion. We've come to the end of the event and we wish to say goodbye.